Andrew, and welcome to the third year of the Independent Accountability Panel's review of the Energy Charter disclosures. In starting the meeting, I would like to acknowledge the traditional custodians of country throughout Australia and their connections to land, sea and community. We pay our respect to their elders past and present and extend that respect to all Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander people today. Andrew, thank you very much for your disclosure, and congratulations on your commitments to the Energy Charter and the Better Together initiatives. You would know Cassandra Goldie, CEO of ACOS, and Andrew Richards, the CEO of Energy Users Association of Australia. Just a few introductory remarks. It is regrettable that in 2021, we're still talking about the impact of COVID-19 on individuals, families and businesses around Australia, including energy businesses, as well as natural disasters in some areas. We actually consider that the themes of this year's report are likely to be similar to last year's: affordability of essential services, transition to net zero emissions by 2050 or sooner, with the consequent key issue that we're focusing on, that no customers should be left behind in this transition, particularly because of affordability. And these themes have generally been confirmed by the stakeholder forums that we've already held. So we're here to discuss with you and the other CEOs of signatory companies and to get your perspective on 2021. We will have some questions, but it's really, I'd like to pass it over to you to ask you to highlight key points from your disclosure, and then we can open it up for discussion.
Sure. It's good to see you all again. It's been a fairly interesting year for us all, is probably my opening statement. Probably the highlights for me, and I think, I've been reflecting on the journey we've been on and our association with the Energy Charter. I'd probably say the first one for us was we've made a change structurally around, we've now got retail, but we've got a customer role embedded in our structure, right? So that's a continuing evolution. So we've got a head of retail and customer, and we're actually resourcing now to support that function. So that's a significant step, because it sends a very clear signal to the organisation about the importance of the customer, but also future energy and what we're investing in future energy. I'd say the other highlights for me are we've really improved and continuing to offer a range of products and services to customers that are, they are looking for different solutions, that they've got different priorities, and being able to work with them is, been a real shift for us. We're seeing about an 80% increase, for example, in terms of where we were last year to where we are this year, and the types of products and services customers are looking for. For me, working on the Energy Charter and the Better Together National Code for the Energy Brokers, we were a big part of that. Something that, in my background years ago, I was very concerned about it. And to see that come together now is, I think, a really big step forward for the industry. So being associated with that was, I think, a significant positive. And just recently, what we're doing to support Uniting in terms of, again, another Energy Charter initiative, and we've contributed to that. And we're now seeing just the leverage of that into our regions. And what do I mean by that? As you know, we're very active with supporting communities and where we operate, and we have a very sophisticated and very mature approach to that. What we're now doing, for example, is we're able to bring Uniting into, as an example, the Banana Shire Emergency Support and Accommodation Centre, which we support, because typically if people end up in that centre, they've actually been through a form of hardship with their energy costs. So we've got the intersection of the two things occurring for us. It's only just sort of happened in the last few weeks. So for me, we've moved the dial. And if you asked me a question last year, and I talked about, where we are on that cultural journey, and it's when I get an operator at sites start talking to me about the customer and the importance of the customer, I know that we've, come a long way. We're not there yet. However, what I would say is in my conversations at site, there's now a recognition of the customer and an inquiry about what we are doing with the customer. That wasn't there 12 months ago. So we've turned the dial culturally, but I totally acknowledge we've got a long way to go before I see that reflected at a generation side. So look, that's my opening, that's sort of my highlights of the year that's been and where we are on that journey.
Great, thank you. All right, well, Cass or Andrew, would you like to start?
Yeah, thanks, Claire. Just a couple of follow-up questions, actually, Andrew. It's great to hear that kind of overview from you. And can I also say, I think, you know, that preparedness to be frank about where you're actually at in the process as well. It's, you know, that it's not a marketing exercise. It's actually, you know, what you're communicating is a genuine effort to acknowledge where you've been and that desire to sort of embed a much more customer-driven perspective on the inside of the organisation and, you know, in the business. So a couple of things I'm interested in with that hard work that was done on the code. What do you see as being the most tangible impacts you want to have happen as a result of developing that code now?
When you don't have customers saying, I did not sign up to that because of misleading information that's been provided by a broker, which has been a systemic issue in the industry. And therefore that should be reflected in your ombudsman complaints that are coming through and the numbers around misleading and misrepresentation of I didn't sign up to that. I didn't realise I signed up to that. When you get that out of the industry, that's the most tangible thing for me, because that goes to brand, that goes to reputation, that goes to loyalty. So for me, that's why I was very keen for us to be a part of that, because it's been a big issue in the industry. So to me, you can measure it very tangibly. By ombudsman numbers, complaints and ombudsman, right? And then you're also going to be able to measure it in terms of your loyalty and then for your churn. So and then reputationally in terms of how you're seen in the industry as well. Yeah,
because I saw you reported that you've done this independent market research.
Yep.
Right. And your sort of summary in the disclosure was that you came out okay on the trust factor, but not where you'd like to be on transparency.
Yep.
Can you just speak a bit more to what you think is behind that finding and what are your plans to tackle that?
Yep. No, look, it's been a big part. So if you remember last year, we did our first customer survey and out of that, we put a whole lot of changes into the business, including systems and processes. What you're referring to is we've been out to our stakeholders in our communities and done that survey. So what that for me was about, and particularly I can zero straight in it because I've had the conversation with the people who said that, was we're not, you take Bill Wheeler, right, in the Banana Shy Council, their future is heavily dependent upon our future. And so what their comment was, we're not clear on your plans. We're not clear on where you are going to be in 5 years, 10 years, 15 years. And there's a whole lot of reasons for that. You've got to accept it. And then you've got to then say, okay, so let's now start to address that. So, and I think, you know, part of it was we didn't quite know ourselves, I'll be completely honest. And for me, it's been the intersection of a number of things in the last year that's come together. And we now have a longer term view of what Callide looks like in Banana Shy Council, for example, and then how they can be a part of it. Now, where I got to just recently, because I sat down with the CEO and the mayor about 4 weeks ago, I regularly sit down with them, by the way. Where we got to is we're now saying, look, we're going to create this energy hub at Callide Power Station because we're going to be putting other services and products there, which is going to create opportunities for our people, but also preserve that asset in the community. What I want to do with them now is co-fund with them and other regional councils a economic and social vision for the future. So I've sort of said to them, look, we've got to do this together. So here you go. I've articulated what I see Callide looking like at the end of the decade. Now let's start to map what industries and communities and other stakeholders need to start planning for and how we're going to work together on that. So that's how I've framed it with them. I said, I'm prepared to pay it. I'm prepared to co-fund it. but I need you to come in as well, and we'll do that together. So that's the challenge for next year.
Because of course it is challenging, you know, to kind of bring externals into your business decision making. But because I was also picking up on the reference you've made to adopting sort of social value as being at the core of your business decision making, and it'll be really great to hear what kind of structures you're planning to put in place, and you could use that particular locality as an example of what, you know, how to have a kind of you can't have shared governance always, but you can certainly have partnership. So I'm interested in what structures you might build to create that kind of confidence that there will be transparency and participation. Because as no doubt, Andrew, as we come to some of the things you'll focus on in terms of transition and, you know, the jobs of the future and everything, confidence at community level that they're a part of it will be really fantastic if you can achieve it.
Yeah, I agree. And look, my thinking on that is, you know, while I have informal meetings with the mayor and the CEO of the council, I had the whole council out to a different site. I had the whole council out to one of our sites and took them right through the site, and I sat down and I articulated the vision for what we were doing there. Interestingly, their view of our transparency is quite the opposite from the other council. And the reason being is our thinking is far more mature and advanced, and we've actually got a very close relationship. It's the nature of the relationship. So for me, the framework and the governance and the structure around that is you've got to have that frequency of visibility in front of the council. To me, the vehicle through the study is a big part of that, because it's there's joint ownership, there's joint outcome. So for me, that then will lay the framework. But I think it just starts with you have whether it's every 4 months or 6 months, but whatever it is, you get in front of the entire council. And they've asked me to brief I gave the council a briefing about 2 years ago. And for me, it's like, okay, we need to get back where I'm doing that more regularly, and you've got an idea of exactly where we're going and what we're doing and what we're going to do in the study. It starts there, and then you build out from that.
So that's the sort of the notion that you'll turn up even if there's not much more to tell. At least you're open and transparent that this is still where we're at, and, you know, decisions being made over there that we're keeping back from you.
I think there's a lot to tell. I think we struggled to get our story together, which is where that concern around transparency was, right? So we've now got our story quite clear in our own minds, which is now we're able to communicate more effectively. And what do I mean by that? You know, when you look at a power station site, it's got these strategic attributes which you can't overlook, which is it's got connection, it's got transmission, it's got water, it's got land approvals, it's got lots of land, and it's got a skilled workforce, right? So those things are there. So then when you actually break it down and you don't look at it in terms of it's a coal-fired power station, you look at that and you go, okay, so how do I build out from that? And now you go, we'll drop a hydrogen plant, put in batteries. We're now going to put in place pathways for training for people to go into other industries and other sectors. And so that framework's coming together. That didn't exist. So it's the intersection of our strategy with what we're doing, future investments, along with recognising what we've got, the community engagement, and what we've done around our workforce, which I'll get to as well a bit later. But to me, it's that there is a lot to say around that, because it's an ongoing thing that we're working in, month in, month out. And I mean, one of the things I keep reminding myself, you can never over-communicate.
No, that's right. I was looking at the, as you remember at the panel recommendations last year, we were sort of talking about that sort of participation, sort of with the social policy, social value voice, community, benefit at the board level, or at that sort of like partnership governance council, external, customer council level. Now, your business is a particular kind. Yeah. So it won't always look the same as, say, a full retailer. but I was curious about whether you'd started to build that sort of architecture to support these transformation processes over time.
Yeah, no, we absolutely have. For example, we've got what's happened in the last year is we've got this Callide Futures Group. So that didn't exist. So we've sat down with the unions. We meet monthly or every 6 weeks, all of the unions, and a representation of the workforce. We've just done a demographic study of our entire workforce and what that is telling us in terms of what people want to stay in the region, what people want to move, what people want to move into different industries, what training, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. So you can now slice and dice your workforce. So this is the piece that was missing, right? So then you go, right, if you're creating this opportunity over here, well, here's how your pathway can go to that. Or within the broader industry context for Central Queensland and how you say, oh, if you're prepared to move from Biloela to Gladstone, then there's a job for you in hydrogen. So you can sort of see it's this maturing of thinking that wasn't there last year, but to me, it's that intersection of all of those things together. So that's that hasn't been there. So we've got that framework in place. And I have to say the feedback from the unions is incredibly positive because you've had a lot of language around just transition. It's almost become a negative concept. And it's in some regards, it's a little bit toxic because it's sort of like a throwaway line with no substance that sits behind it. And you go, well, what does that mean? And so the fact that we're just doing it with a grassroots level, very inclusive, we're getting, oh, this is the sort of thing that we're expecting. So, yeah, and look, ultimately it's where you go to, what are you going to put on the table in terms of a real job or a real, investment in training or, if you are going to exit and you're going to facilitate exit of people, then you've got to put the money on the table. So that's going to come, but it's going to be based on data and consultation. It's not just going to be, here's a concept. So I think that for me has been a big part of our journey in the last year.
Look, thanks, Andrew. Exactly because, of the, as you say, the buzzword of just transition, and then it's got, until we move to start doing it, people have lost confidence that actually anything's going to, that they can trust will happen. So I might, Claire, just to see if Andrew wants to follow up, with questions on that front. There's a few other questions I've got that are more at the retail end, but this would be good to stay with as a theme, I think.
I agree. I think it's a really important theme. And Andrew, I've got the same comments, but I'll hand over to you.
Yeah.
Andrew, thank you for that. The Callide Futures Group, I don't remember seeing that in your disclosure.
Yes,
it is in there.
Yeah, it's there.
Yeah.
It's there, Andrew. It's just for me too, like you, I went, that's actually a really important thing to pull out and highlight. So thanks for the more detail on it.
Well, that was my question because I that jumped out at me as well, and I wanted to get some more information because you're absolutely right that we talk about transition plans, but they seem to be in short supply, and communities are understandably anxious and confused and sceptical and worried about their futures and the futures of their children in terms of employment. And it seemed to me if the Callide Futures Group was working, it almost seemed like a bit of a blueprint because you are involving the workers and the unions and the local stakeholders. So I think it's a very important initiative and it would be good to hear a little bit more about that.
Sure.
Sorry, Andrew. But
social value in decision making, this seems like the manifestation of that objective.
Yeah, that's exactly absolutely, that's where it's come from. So, we started with the social value policy at the board level. What does it mean? What is it trying to do? And it's about it's about the broader communities and the various stakeholders and taking them with you in your decision making, right? So then that was all 18 months, 2 years ago. And now where we've got to is we've now put that in place with Futures Group. That's exactly what it's about. And I think the other thing, I just want to reinforce what I said earlier. If you look 12 months ago, this didn't exist, but we also didn't have clarity about what the futures were for these sites, right? Because you've got, Callide B shutting, and you've got that rhetoric and that within the media and the industry, and it's like, well, and then you hear the word transition, And it's like, well, what does transition mean to if it's shutting? And this was what was creating anxiety and fear. And then you go, well, actually, let's not use transition. Let's use transformation, because that doesn't mean you're transitioning out. You're transforming what you have. What do you have? Well, and it's what I said before, you've got those strategic assets. Or what are your workforce interested in doing? So you can sort of see how we've now moved along that journey, but it's the intersection of those two things. And now we've got a vision supported by what we're doing with our people that we can then communicate to the council, for example. You can sort of see, where this conversation started around transparency and trust, how we've addressed it, because we've now got greater clarity about what we are doing and what the opportunity is and what people's place in that is. So for me, it's been it's a real journey that's been taking time, probably longer than I would have liked, but you can make lots of reasons why that's the case, but I think these things do gestate and they come together.
And this is a great example. What we've been talking to communities about is this theme of no customer left behind, or no community left behind, and how do you actually do that? Because the great transition or transformation, I like transformation more than transition, because transition seems like you're going to shut old stuff down and build new stuff, when it's different to that. It seems to be, I agree with you, Claire, it's a blueprint potentially of how you actually manage that. Because Andrew, when I hear you talk about Callide and I hear other generators talk about their assets, it's exactly the same conversation that's going on inside hard-to-abate sectors in heavy industry.
Yeah.
So if you've got a smelter or a steel worker or whatever, how do we actually transform this thing? Because we want to keep our people employed, because we how do we actually do that? And what's the process? Because sometimes the technology doesn't exist. I mean, coal-fired power stations are the ultimate hard-to-abate sector. Right? So how do you do that? And I think there's some real lessons in there potentially for how you do that.
Exactly. And look, you can, and the other thing is that you can talk a lot and there's a lot of rhetoric, but until you actually got something happening, then there's a skepticism.
Mm-hmm.
So, and the other thing that's, this week we announced the hydrogen demonstration project, right? So there you go. We're investing in behind the meter, pure green hydrogen. It's a demonstration plant to manage the exposure, but that's an example of what the future is and the jobs that will exist in that. And then how you're putting that on an existing site, you're leveraging those attributes. So you can sort of see, I could talk a lot of things, but until I'm actually sort of investing and putting something on the ground, there's a lot of hollow words. The workforce is looking at you going, yeah, I've heard, I hear you, but I don't see you, right? And I talked about the shift that I've observed in going to site. I do town halls every sort of 3 months, and I did Callide and Kogan back in August, and it was a absolute notice. Because what was I saying? I was saying, there's a hydrogen plant going to be built. It's going to be announced in the next sort of 2 months. There's batteries coming, one here. It's going to be announced. We're going to need people who have electrical operating systems capabilities to work on these. And you can see, and literally no one wanted to leave the room. And typically when you've got a whole bunch of guys who take, during the day, they're sitting there nodding off. No one was nodding off. They're all sitting there going, shit, this is my future. Finally, I can see what you've been talking about coming into action, right? So I think that's a big part of it too, that you've got to sort of back it up with tangible activity that people can relate to.
Andrew, could I invite you to provide to the panel any further detail you have about that particular process? It may be that it's still fairly nascent, you're just kind of getting it going and there's not much more that you can bring through. I mean, I'm curious, for example, about whether you're planning to try and put some kind of compact type structure around it, where you actually really pull through the social benefit, the workforce plan, that kind of, to build some architecture around it ongoing, or, what, just curious if there's anything further you can provide us on it.
Look, what I've said is probably summarizes it. Where we're going, a lot of what you've just asked, where we're going is the next, because we're analysing this data and we're now building that framework around it. Okay. And we're going to have, so if an employee has identified their name in that survey and said, I want to talk to you about moving to or training, then we've got to set up that framework to then enable those conversations to happen, to then identify what the opportunity is and the investment required. So we're at that point right now. And the other thing I want to say really clearly here is we took this initiative ourselves because we could see what was happening at an industry-wide level, which was lots of talk, lots of big committees, and absolutely nothing happening. And so we deliberately just went, I'm not going to ask, I'm just going to do this. And the unions were like, hallelujah, thankfully. And I said, and I don't want anyone else involved because I want to control this. And I just went, and the unions are like, we love it. Because part of what worries me about, and I haven't sung this too loudly because I want to get on and deal with it. And as soon as you put your head up and start to talk about this, and I got asked to talk at that conference that was back in April in Gladstone around transition and everything, and I deliberately declined to share this and deliberately declined to talk because I said, look, I'm focused on the outcomes, I'm focused on our people and our stakeholders. We're not at a point where we want to share that because that's our priority, right? So I'm very careful around this because I could see ourselves losing control of the agenda, given the political nature of what we're talking about.
I was going to ask you, Andrew, you're alluding to it, but I'll say, does it make you more nervous to talk in public about the transition, given what happened?
No, not really. Not for me. It's how you frame it. And I think if you look at the way anything I've said to you now is not controversial, and I don't think there's in any way of any concern because it's about how do you build on what you've got. So that's an important point. It's not about what are you replacing. And I think that was the mistake that was made. It was like we're moving away from, and it's like, no, we've got that and we're going to build on this, and here's the opportunity for our people. That's a very positive message. And it's not, and you're reflecting the inherent value of the existing assets that you had in that statement.
It's the framing of it, I agree, is really important. Yeah.
Andrew, 2050 is not that far away, let alone 2030, which is the preferred date, I think. Are you feeling the time pressure? And this time next year, in 1 year's time, what will you be talking about then?
Gosh, this is a fast-moving topic. The paper is just, at the moment leading into Glasgow is just consumed with this. Look, I don't see coal lasting beyond 2040, right? So 2050, no, there's not an issue, right? I don't see coal lasting beyond 2040. We will do, assets will run their life. I've got to be, very clear about that. Assets will run their life, absolutely. But, from our portfolio, that is what we're looking at. This time next year, look, I think there'll be, I'm hoping out of Glasgow and I'm hoping at a federal level, we've got a clear path defined. And I think as an industry that there's overwhelming support for that. I don't think you wouldn't talk to anyone in the industry who didn't see the need for that. I mean, we're a signatory to the AEC's position on net zero by 2050. So we're completely aligned with that. We're aligned with our shareholders' position on that as well. I think the ESG debate has moved so much in the last year that I wouldn't have predicted where we are today 12 months ago. So therefore, it's difficult to give you a firm prediction on where we'll be in 12 months, given the speed of change. But to me, it's that certainty of that pathway that we're looking for.
Andrew, can I just clarify in terms of the perennial debate about targets? Have you adopted your own version of that? The 2030, 2050, or are you essentially okay?
No, we're aligned with our shareholders' position on targets. So 50% renewables in Queensland by 2030. So we're supporting that, and we're also aligned with the AEC position as net zero by 2050.
Okay.
So, Andrew, you said, I agree with you. I think particularly the Queensland coal generators will run their asset life, but they'll be run differently.
Oh, absolutely. And we totally...
So that's a pretty big transition within the business itself, isn't it? Because you've got to start making additional investments in improving ramp rates and those sorts of things.
And we're in that really key point in the industry where we need the market signals and the regulatory framework to protect that. Because the AEMC essential services are going to contribute to that. Wherever we go with these ESB recommendations on, is it some form of capacity? Is there something? There needs to be something there to ensure that we've got that diversified energy mix to help with the transition. Now, it goes to one of the key questions that you've got, not leaving a customer behind in the transition. For me, when you look at Europe at the moment, you don't want to see that cost pressure coming into Australia through not coordinating this transition. And I think that's the really key point. So you do need coal and gas in the mix while you invest in your future. And then that will facilitate that. And that's the Queensland government's position very clearly as well. So I do think it's so important that and we will be, Andrew, we're taking our units down to loads that we've never got to previously. I've just signed off on another project for a whole lot of new igniters on one of the other Callide Bs, which will take it down to a lower level in the middle of the day. Will these units be running on weekday profiles, two shifting, whatever? There'll be variations of that, seasonal run profiles. You'll have maintenance programs that reflect that. So we're doing that work, so preparing for different scenarios under that. Will some of the coal units be turned into synchronous condensers? I think so, because the network, you'll need the network support, and it's a great way of preserving that asset in a way which supports the stability of the network to facilitate the transition. So that's how you'll extract life out of them. So there's lots of things that you'll see, I think, emerge over the coming years, because we do need to ensure that we don't get sudden withdrawals. It's coordinated. And therefore customers, and if you remember what I said last year, I talked about one of the frustrating things is there's a misrepresentation of what this is going to cost, and a misrepresentation of how easy it is. And it's not easy. And it is going to cost. And government's got a role, industry's got a role, customers got a role, everyone's got a role in that. But can we just be real about that and transparent about that?
Look, I couldn't agree with you more. I think, and the focus on wholesale price outcomes of policy, I think, is quite misleading as well, to be honest. Because a lot of the costs sit outside of that. But anyway, look, I think, I think we all agree moving to net zero by 2050 or sooner is the right thing to do. We have to do it. But we've got to want us to.
Andrew, I don't think we're expressing your view on the panel about what the appropriate target is. We've got a different view now.
No, that's a personal. And just switching gear a little bit. Cass always pulls me up on that. I get a bit too political.
It's just for example, ACOS, and I'm not here as ACOS, we have a view that 2050 is too late.
Also, Andrew, just in terms of the cost, I think it's always obviously important to highlight to the community the cost of not doing these things as well as the cost of doing them, and
totally
that's often overlooked.
Totally agree, but let's put it all on the table and not just talk about the cost of not doing it. Let's talk the cost of doing it. They've both got to be looked at. So people go in with their eyes wide open. If you move there too quickly, if you move there too quickly in Australia, it will have a significant commercial impact on people, and I don't think people realise that. And I don't think universally understand that. And I think that's the issue for me. And if you look at what happened earlier this year, so Callide, losing Callide, and then you look at Yallourn, you look at the Windsor, and you look at the price that then came through. That's what I'm talking about. And it's that coordinated approach to ensure that you don't get that playing out over the next 10 years as best possible.
And look, you can tell, Andrew, I suspect from all of us here, that we are particularly interested in what you're doing, because you are an example of you're getting on and doing the change process. And that's so important to pull up and highlight it, because it'll be in that process, won't it, Andrew Richards, that we actually flesh out what's needed.
That's where I was trying to get to, Cass, before you scolded me, rightfully so. Andrew, the Better Together initiatives, or the Better Together sort of push, if you like, seems to be bringing up some really good initiatives. So the Future Energy Skills Program being one of those.
Yeah.
The things we've just talked about, and your Callide Futures group, that seems to be. Are you seeing a level of collaboration within the industry around those things, or is it because it seems to be a little bit hit and miss?
Look, it's improved, Andrew. We're happy to contribute on that energy skills group. My observation, what I said earlier, is if you go too broad, you quickly lose control.
Yeah.
And I'm really very nervous about that, quite rightly. And my reflection and looking at what's happened around the world and in Australia is, when these things work effectively, you've either got to have a very clear macro view of where you're going to with the lighthouse at the horizon, and then you work back. Now, we don't have a lighthouse. So absent a lighthouse, you've got to then step out from your own space and progressively then step at a time, map that out. So that's kind of where I've defaulted to, if you know what I mean, Andrew, because as soon as you start to go broad, then you've got, we'll do this, and you lose. And I need to get my own house in order.
It just strikes me, this is exactly the same conversation we have with large energy users. Exactly the same conversation. Particularly the lack of a lighthouse. In fact, part of the problem is there's 15 lighthouses at the moment.
Yeah.
Right? So what do I head towards? Because someone actually leading me towards the rocks, not away from.
Yeah, exactly. And look, I just, Germany put 60 billion euros on the table. I think I've got the number right, to pay for the transition. Now that's the lighthouse, right? So here you go, 60 billion. Now, so you've got the funding to then facilitate the training, the investment in future energy, if people are wanting to retire early, the facilitation of that, the relocation for communities. So you've got the funding.
Yeah.
So very clearly you can then build out from that. Now, we don't have anything like that.
What will part of the process on the charter, Andrew, I think, is also sharpening the clarity about what is within the control of the signatories to drive and what actually you need to support your improvements, including in this transition, because you'll see the panel will focus very heavily again on this particular area. So if you've got any comments, I hear you on that one, for example, where the investment that's needed, the support that's needed to sustain the process ongoing. If there's anything else you want to add to that. There was just, when we get there, just a couple of questions on retailer, on the sort of retail end too.
Oh, look, I would emphasise that we're going to get to a point where we need policy. We're going to need legal and industrial frameworks. We're going to need, coordinated industry training and transition. So the framework, for example, if you've got, just hypothetical example, you've got 10 people who want to move to Powerlink or Energy Queensland, so staying within the government ownership within Queensland, and they want to go and work as linesmen now, great. Well, how do you then identify, facilitate that process? So let's put that in place. That's an example, right? So what training programs do you want to put in place to then move people out of coal into batteries or hydrogen or renewables? You're starting to see things like training facility centres the unions have built, which is great, but who's funding who to then go through that, and what is the job at the end of that? So let's just start to map that out. So that for me is let's get down Because we're going to get to a point where that's where we will get to probably in the next 12 months. We've done the demographic analysis for our people, we've had the conversations, we've identified our future, opportunities, and then we're going to exhaust that, and we're going to need to then start to build out. So for me, it's that policy, the regulatory, the legal framework to enable that to happen. I think the big picture stuff is really important. So what's the vision for Central Queensland? Which is and I know the government is working on that. We're working with them on that. So really getting a clear vision for the whole region and what your different opportunities are within that.
Thanks, Andrew.
Andrew, could you just comment in terms of almost a couple of issues seems to have morphed together, the transformation to the new world of energy, and people, the talk tends to be about electric vehicles and electric vehicle charging stations and batteries and all the rest of it. But we're concerned that there's a significant number of customers who aren't even in that space. The prospect of them affording an electric vehicle is so far removed. They're having trouble affording their own electricity bill at the moment. They're living often in poor accommodation, etc. So do you have any comment on how we make sure that in this new world where everyone is very excited about electric vehicles and all the rest of it, that we don't leave a significant portion of the population behind?
Look, I mean, I do think that EVs, you do need policy mechanisms to facilitate the uptake of EVs, right? You look overseas and that's been very effective. We are investing in EVs ourselves. So just so you know, we're installing about 80 chargers over the last year. So on the back of our customers that we have. So, and our whole approach to this to bring the cost down so it is affordable is that you've got to facilitate that growth and the uptake, and then you will see that price come down so people can afford it. To me, we're leading by example in that regard. So we're putting that infrastructure in place. We're putting those products in place so people can do that, and we'll continue. And we're working with Hyundai and Tesla and different companies in terms of encouraging because we only get the rump of what's available overseas with EVs, and you've really got to help with the OEMs to bring their vehicles in here. So for me, it's around you've got to take the lead on that. We're doing that, and I do think does that mean that everyone will be able to afford an EV at the end of the decade? No, but a large percentage of the population will, and that's a good outcome. That's a good outcome for Australia. So that's our approach to you got to take the lead yourself.
You'll be fighting the hydrogen guys all the way to that, though. And
it's interesting because it's interesting this play that's going on at the moment around something like Toyota, for example, are jumping straight hybrids to hydrogen. They're not doing the EV, whereas Hyundai's got a different strategy. And look, we're in both, right? So our hydrogen demonstration plant out at Kogan, we've got an offtake agreement with a local trucking company. And this is again about you've got to get the technology out there. You've got to get understanding, and then the cost will come down. And we're talking to local mines in the region as well around their conversion of their diesel fleet to hydrogen. And we do see that happening in the next year. So we're happy to be a part of that. And our hydrogen is 100% green. It's powered off solar with a battery behind the meter. So that's exactly what customers want, which is pure green, not greenwashing. Pure green. And that's, for me, we're pushing on the hydrogen on the large vehicles, pushing on the EVs, small vehicles, and they're both complementary.
Just Claire, if I may, and Andrew, just on the retailer front, the joint venture, just a couple of questions there.
Sure.
I sort of noted, that in the last year, the customer base had, dropped off a bit, and that this, presumably you're looking at the next 12 months as being a key chance to push back out, and you want to grow your sort of market share there. And you flagged up that sort of customer retention is sort of a focus for it. Given this is a chance, of course, to really show best practice, as you're trying to grow a market rather than, you know, fix up problems.
Yep.
Can you just speak to how in the, you know, with the ethos of this charter, you would do that, recognising where customers have been over the last 12 months? It's pretty grim out there for some, you know, to Claire's point about people on very low incomes and businesses that have really struggled, big, you know, energy debts. What's your plan there to really try and ensure people and, you know, businesses that are most vulnerable are at the heart of that strategy?
Yeah, look, COVID's absolutely hit the numbers, and they have come down. So we have active conversations with Alinta about how we're going to turn that around. Multi-product offering is part of what we've been talking to them about. So gas came in last year, insurance. We're pushing the EV angle through them because of where we're at and offering different green products. So you're going to see, for me, you start with the value offering in terms of improving the range of products and services that customers can get. Interestingly, you know, Alinta continually do very well with their rating in terms of their service and their sort of overall trust and loyalty, so which is positive because you can build out from that. We do see, you know, they do want to get out and do kiosks again and you know, start to sort of be more public and engage more directly. They haven't been able to do that, which is why the numbers are where they're at. So that's going to be a big part of it going forward. But for me, the growth comes back to what I said up front. It's around, you've got to improve the product offering and the service that goes with that. One of the things, and I'm probably going to jump into your next question, so while we go there. One of the things that, you know, has come out of the Energy Charter in relation to Alinta, and this has been the journey that you've had with me on this, is just around hardship and how that's been treated in the JV. So what I've seen, you know, we shifted so we now focus on it. They've now created, courtesy of this ongoing conversation with them, they've actually now got a vulnerable customer department. So they didn't have that previously. So they've now, and they've had some problems with their hardship program. And out of those problems have come new systems, processes, the dedicated focus. They've delivered training, specialised training for their call centre people on hardship. So they're actually really investing in that. So I'm seeing a lot of upside from them in the last 6 to 9 months. But that's been on the back of some challenges as well, which have been public. So yeah, that's kind of where I see the JV at the moment. And I think for me, they've had some priorities down south, obviously, because of what the impact of COVID's been for Victoria and New South Wales and vulnerable customers down there. So, and I've seen that play out too in terms of getting the focus in Queensland, so southeast Queensland.
Yeah, because obviously you've got a great role you can play in this joint venture to really be asking those hard questions and making sure that the focus on how to support people in hardship is at the core of the design as you're, you know, developing the joint venture up, rather than it being we'll fix it up later kind of approach.
Well, you know, I've just given you some examples of, I don't think we're the only reason it happened, but we were a huge contributing factor in terms of our focus on it. You know, we were saying, well, let's talk about it. We want to know what you're doing differently. We want to see the changes. We want to see the improvements.
Yeah.
And so, and that's at a very that's with myself and Jeff Dimery. You know, we get together 2 to 3 times a year, as well as the operational stuff, which happens every month. They know that that happened out of the Energy Charter, right? So that, if you go right back to 2 years ago, that's where it started. And look where we are now. Specialised department called vulnerable customers. They didn't even have that. So to me, you know, you don't, it's like safety. You never let up on it though. You've got to constantly focus on it. Because then, you know, you'll, and then if you're not looking at it and you see that culture shifting internally.
I was just going to encourage you in the sort of design of your sort of strategy, because you've got a marketing strategy, presumably, that Alinta's, you know, working on to try and grow this base, to have the metrics built into that that are about making sure that you are absolutely the sort of best practice on the hardship front. We are worried about the risk of disconnections growing, you know, once the heat comes off the COVID pandemic, you know, politically, that we could really see, you know, some customers really struggle. So just wanted to encourage that. It'd be great to see that over the course of the next 12 months sort of come through in the next disclosure. Yeah.
Yep, totally.
Andrew, we're rapidly running out of time. I just wanted to, oh, sorry, Andrew or Cass, are there any other questions you wanted to ask?
Not so much a question. I think we need to keep trying to twist Dimmer's arm to get him to stand up, Andrew.
I do. I don't give up on it.
You know, it's, yeah.
Andrew, I was just going to ask you, just to reverse positions for a moment, is there anything that you consider the panel should particularly focus on in the next year? And do you think that those themes that we talked about are pretty much what you would suggest?
I think where we focused, where our conversation today was dominated around 2 or 3 key things, right? And it's around that transformation of the industry. What does the future look like, and how are you taking people with you on that journey? I think that's the most important thing that we should be talking about in the year, because I think it's still going to be confused, and I think it's still going to be difficult. So the more we talk about it, hopefully we provide that clarity and that pathway that goes with it. So I couldn't emphasize that enough. It's the main issue. It's all I do day in, day out, right? It's everything I do in the business has a lens to that. So yeah, that's the most important thing for me. I think, you know, and I said this, Andrew, you dialed into the Energy Charter CEO forum.
Yeah. And
for me, these things are very much around culture and leadership. And I think the panel needs to really reinforce, you know, where your line of inquiry, where the conversation should go is around your leadership, your culture, and what are you doing to support what I just spoke about, which is that transformation. Because that if you don't have that, you know, you're not going to move. So for me, that's the most important thing out of these conversations is you've got to be able to have that, you've got to be able to reflect, and you've got to be able to provide that insight as to what you've done around your culture to shift that, and what's your leadership been to that. And
what an absolutely perfect place to end the discussion. So thank you. We really appreciate your time, your frankness, and your very helpful comments. So thank you, Andrew, and we look forward to further advances next year. Great. No, good to be a part of it. Good luck with the rest of the day. It's a long day for you guys, so I hope it goes well. Thank you. Thanks very much. Thanks, Andrew. Thanks. Cheers. See you.